Okay, well, good evening. Welcome to Wednesday Night Alive. I know everybody, but I'm not used to seeing all of you on Wednesday, so I'll have to adjust a little bit. Dr. Kenn is en route from the Burbank airport, so he should be here momentarily, in case you were wondering. So let's open with a prayer, shall we? I invite you to just take a nice deep breath and just let it out with a nice sigh. Just let it go. And as we breathe in again, we breathe in that realization, that expanding reality that is God, filling our being, becoming our being, and expressing through and as our being. All in one flowing movement. That the energy arises within us, it moves through us, it becomes us, and it expresses as us. And this is happening all the time, in every way. And that same energy mingles with itself as we mingle with one another and as we mingle with the world around us. The one idea, the one possibility, the one form, the one love, expressing in a multitude of ways, and yet remaining itself. So what I know is that as I understand this oneness, as I come to recognize it in myself and in others and in the world around me, my life is transformed. I move from feeling a separate piece of a world that is often frightening to a singularity within a larger singularity, knowing that everything is connected. Knowing that I can see through appearances to a deeper truth that always resonates with love. So I stand in this realization right now. I stand in the power and the realization of that power. I stand in the love and the realization of that love. I stand in the freedom and the realization of that freedom. And I stand in the wisdom and the realization of that wisdom. All unfolding as me right here and right now. So with deep gratitude for this unfolding expression of life through me and as me, and for this incredible philosophy and teaching that has helped me to awaken to it, I lovingly, trustingly, and with deep faith and conviction release this word into the creative field that we call mind, knowing it is done unto me as I believe, and together we say, and so it is. Okay. Feel better? Okay. Well, let's do some more. We do this little chant every week. I thought maybe this week be a little different. We'll do it as a chant. Reverend Dr. Edward Viyun has been doing this for a few years. He'll come to a conference and he brings the beads, 108 beads, and he'll chant this 108 times. We're not going to do that, but we can do it a few. And we usually read it and like normal reading, but it's kind of interesting to do it in the chant form. And the chant form is just simply like this. There is one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. Join in. There is one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. Remember to breathe. There is one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. Life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. There is one life. That life is God's life. That life is perfect. That life is my life now. Stop. See how you can get going with that? Now, you can do that in traffic. You can do that before you go to sleep at night or when you wake up in the morning. You can use the beads or don't use the beads. But it can be a very nice, comforting way to kind of settle and center yourself. I was at a retreat last week up in Massachusetts, and we were walking a labyrinth in the middle of a forest. It was just gorgeous, all rocks and moss and everything. And I chanted that all the way through the labyrinth. And it just really put me in a really nice space. So now we have a little video. We have, this is a sample. I know everybody here doesn't get to go to a Silomar, so I thought I'd bring a sample of the music. Now, this is a little tricky because they don't record the music at a Silomar because of copyright things. So I found another video of a couple of the musicians that we had at Asilomar this year. In fact, they've been here about 2 or 3 years ago. Erica Luckett and Lisa Ferraro. And this is a song called Kindness. And I thought I'd share that with you tonight.
Preciousness of all the things I believe in tomorrow. Despite the troubles we face, because I believe. Tell me what you're gonna do for me. I will be K-I-N-G. Tell me what you're gonna do for me. I'll show you kindness. Say what I'm gonna do for you. I will be K-I-N-D too. Tell you what I'm gonna do for you. Show you kindness. Some say that the world is divided into weak and strong. There's good and bad and right and wrong. Don't trust the ones who sit on fences. They're either with us or against us. Well, I'm a child of many worlds, and if I had to choose just one, I'd say my home is a planet that circles around the sun. It's like a ship and we're on it for a ride. At the end of the night we're all on the same side. Maybe different in the ways we think, but if we don't hang together the ship is gonna sink. So I believe in kindness, I believe in simple things, I believe in the preciousness of all beings. I believe in tomorrow, despite the troubles we faced, because I believe in the human race. Oh, yeah. Kindness, 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 kindness. Learn to measure how we buy, how hard we push, how hard we shove. When our greatest strength is our capacity to love. Kindness, I believe in kindness, kindness. Oh, I believe in kindness, kindness. Oh, I believe in kindness, 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 kindness.
No, they don't film. They don't record the music at Asilomar because of copyright. That wasn't at Asilomar. It was 2010. Erica, who is the guitarist and the vocalist, since that time has had stage 4 cancer, been through quite an experience. She now has curly hair because she lost all her hair and it grew back in curly, and she's fully recovered, and now is also playing the cello. She's really quite an interesting person. She's sort of a citizen of the world, raised in Europe and Brazil, and went to the Sorbonne at age 15 to study law, and then decided to be a musician full time. And she's won Emmys and Grammys, and really quite a interesting person. And also, she's a philosopher. So, and Lisa is out of the East Coast. She's from Pittsburgh, and her basis is jazz and standards and everything. So really great. And so that was Lisa was the music director for Asilomar this year. So we had a great program. So that just gives you a little flavor of some of the, and they did that number during the conference. Yeah. Yeah, they're really amazing. Yeah. I think we had 7 people for their concert. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So again, Dr. Kenn is en route, and the plan was I would speak first and he'll speak second. So far we're right on schedule. Just knowing clear traffic on the 118. So in terms of we decided we would talk about the future of our movement tonight, and certainly he'll have a little more to say about that than I will. As you probably know, he's been here a few times. He's the spiritual leader of the Centers for Spiritual Living, and before that, for a number of years, he was the president of International Centers for Spiritual Living before the integration. And before that, he was on the board of ICSL and RSI for a number of years. So he's been in leadership in our movement for about 14 years, I think, now, something like that. And but what I would have to say, one of the things we do, I guess, when you do it in any field, you try to think kind of where you're going. Where is your field going? And certainly in terms of looking at our movement, there's a lot of different aspects for that. There's technology, there's cultural changes, there's what's going on in the world around us in terms of how people are involved in religion. There are huge shifts underway in the West and in the United States in particular, kind of away from the traditional church model. A lot of the traditional religions, the mainstream Protestant religions, have been getting smaller for a long time. There's been growth over the last number of years in some of the more fundamentalists, some of the Pentecostal movements. Mormonism has been growing. There we had the whole megachurch phenomenon that began really back in the 60s and carried forward into the last decade. But as of right this moment, nothing's growing in terms of the church model. Mormonism is growing, but not in North America. It's growing in other parts of the world. The Methodist Church is currently closing an average of greater than one church a day. But they have 38,000 of them, so in the last 100 years at that rate. But it's still quite. They used to have a policy, and from the interfaith group I learned this. The Methodist Church had a policy that every 5 years a minister would be relocated. And you kind of, it was kind of interesting. When your 5 years was coming up, you'd kind of be sitting there going, "Oh, where are they going to send me?" Because they literally could send you anywhere. And they pretty much have eliminated that because they don't have enough pulpits to move people to. The Catholic Church has been stagnant, and it's losing numbers now, probably partly because of the scandals they've had, but also I think there is just a general movement toward a secular nation, as has happened in Europe. In Europe, the average church attendance in the European Union is 7% of people regularly go to church. The high is Italy, which is around 25%, which means most of the other countries are even well below 7%. I've been in Europe a few times, and we'll often go to one of the cathedrals on Sunday, and there's a bunch of tourists and like 2 or 3 old ladies in black, and that's pretty much it. European. I was at this retreat I was at. There was a young man from Paris. He's 28. He lives in Paris, and he's studying to be a professor of management. And I asked about church. He says, "I don't know anybody that goes to church. Nobody in my family does. We don't even talk about it." So our churches are seen as tourist attractions. So that's sort of the way things are going. Especially in the industrialized West. So what we're recognizing, I think, in our movement is that we probably need to be looking at other avenues of providing our teaching other than the model. We changed it to centers, but let's face it, it's still the same model as church. And by the way, I should have mentioned that the sudden drop that's happening in the last decade is the people in their 20s are basically stopping. Even in the large Christian megachurches and the Christian groups where they had their large teen movements and things, those kids, once they hit their 20s, are not staying. They're just stopping going to church in really large numbers, and it's happening really rapidly, kind of across the board. Now, does this mean we're not going to have centers? No, I think we'll have centers for a long time. But I think that probably we'll have other ways of reaching out, including online. And some of it will be up by our centers, like what we're doing. We're putting our videos up online, and we're going to begin live streaming our services in a few weeks. And I think also that what we have going for us is that we're more spiritual. We're a spiritual teaching without a lot of the religious trappings. And that's really what seems to be what a lot of people are moving away from. Some of the people writing about this, like Kenn Wilber and some others, are talking about the idea that the Western religions, the image of God, the way that God is understood, has developed over the years from early biblical times up until 1,000 years ago. There were some significant changes in development in the way the deity was understood and God was understood. And that sort of stopped around the beginning of the Middle Ages. And there's been very little change in the way that God is understood and presented by mainstream religion. There was a study done in the early 1990s in the United States about basically asking people what their understanding of God was, asked them to describe God. And what they found was that the average adult at that time, who were probably predominantly Christian, but this was a number of different religions that were involved, the average adult described God the same way as the average 4-year-old. That there was very little change as someone grew up in Western religion in the way God was represented. And Kenn Wilber calls that the magical mythical God, the magical mythical view of God, where God is kind of a being in the sky with magical powers, and there's lots of trappings around that. And there's also the belief that, miracles happen, but primarily in biblical times, and they get more and more rare as you move forward. And usually the explanation is because people lost faith. So a lot of that, in terms of, and at the same time, the people living in the West have matured, in a sense, culturally beyond that level to a rational scientific view of the world, and there's no Jesus for that level. There's no version of God the Father or the Holy Spirit for that level using the Christian model. So people begin to, first what began to happen, and what still happens, is people sort of compartmentalize. They're one way in church and another way in the real world. And then after a while, they begin to just say, well, I'm not going to church anymore because it doesn't relate to me. I had a woman, when I was in Baltimore at the center there, she showed up, and she was in her 70s. She had just left the religion she was born into, which was a mainstream Protestant denomination. And we were talking in class one night about, asking everybody about their spiritual journey. And, I said to her, Eleanor, after 70 some years in that religion, what made you leave? Because, she also shared that there were some people in her family that were not happy with that she did that. And she said, well, I just finally got clear their God was too small. And I needed some place that helped me to see God in a bigger way. Speaking of God in a bigger way, Dr. Kenn Gordon has just walked in. Right off the plane and right to work. We just keep you busy here. All right? So I'm just kicking things off for you a little bit, okay? Good. Okay. Always hard to do. So what was I talking about? She said I needed a bigger image of God. I needed a more complete idea of God. And she said I found that. She first went to Unity and then came into religious science. And I don't think that's an uncommon thing. And I think by a bigger idea of God, she meant an idea of the spiritual that would inform more of her life. That she would be able to apply, use her spiritual understanding and her spiritual. Well, let's face it, it's more than just a practical matter. It's something. It's really something you fall in love with. An understanding of the universe that allows you to feel at home, let's say. And a lot of as people mature, and we mature as a culture beyond the idea of superstition and magic and myth and things like that, we need something that's more grounding, that answers our questions, at least as much as they can be answered, and that we can relate to on a deeper level. So when I think about the future of our movement, that's what I think is, how do we continue to apply this incredible teaching that Dr. Holmes really synthesized out of a number of ancient wisdom traditions and modern psychology and science and some other areas. How do we continue to provide the material for people like yourselves to have access to and to share and to be in community, if that's your choice, or to be sitting home alone on your computer or reading a book or something like that, in a way that it continues to be relevant? Because we're not through changing. We're not through developing. We're not through growing as a human family in terms of our ability to understand the world. Now, since I've been in this teaching, I've encountered a lot of really intelligent people, both in and out, in the teaching and not in the teaching, who know the teaching and who have, seem to feel pretty comfortable that the model of our teaching, the content and the principles, is not in danger of becoming obsolete. Because one of the key principles of our teaching is that, the term we usually use is we're open at the top. We're always willing to expand our capacity to know, or expand what we know within that capacity. We never say, this is it, this is as much as you need to know or as much as you'll ever know, and don't ask questions beyond this level, I can remember as a little kid in school, asking questions and being told, maybe there are just some things you shouldn't ask about, which meant the nun didn't know the answer. And one of the things that really struck me when I got into this teaching and started taking classes was how many times I would say, oh, I used to wonder that when I was 7. And it's like a the answer was deferred until I was 47 or something. And I was, oh, that makes sense from that perspective. They were things I wondered about as a kid, and the answers weren't forthcoming, or at least an answer wasn't forthcoming that allowed me to kind of relate to the situation. I have lots of questions now that don't get answered, but I feel like there's a structure there with which I can contemplate the idea. And one of the things we need to learn to do, and we do learn to do, is what? Live in the question, right? Sometimes that's where it's a wonderful place to be, in the question. Who am I? What am I doing? What's going on? What's the meaning of what's happening in my life right now? So I think Dr. Holmes was really brilliant in his ability to weave a lot of what was then current knowledge into this philosophy, and yet also can create things within the philosophy that say there's more to be woven in. That as we learn and grow, we're open to whatever shows up. You know, about 4 or 5 years ago, the Dalai Lama went to a convention of theoretical physicists. He was invited in, and brain scientists. It was kind of one of these really interesting conventions. It was in Washington, D.C. And I became aware of this because there was an article in the paper that the scientists didn't want him to come. They said, what's he got to talk to us about? He believes in superstition, and we're scientists. So there was a little bit of an uprising. And I remember reading some scientists declined to go to the conference because he was going to speak. And when he did speak, he talked about the importance of science in understanding the world and understanding our religious viewpoints. And at one point he was asked the question, well, what if science were to disprove some of the precepts of Buddhism? And his answer was, well, if science disproved some of the precepts of Buddhism, we'd have to get some new precepts. We would have to change Buddhism to match the proof. Because he said, what good is a spiritual teaching that has been proven false? And the scientists were amazed that he would make that statement. You know, because the experience that we see of religious leaders, at least the ones that get publicity, are they want to deny the proof or the facts if they don't match the teaching. I remember an example of that was a few years before that when they found a piece of a meteorite that they determined came from Mars. I don't know how they figure that stuff out. You know, with that whole universe out there, how they know it came from Mars. But they figured that out, and they thought, they were since proven wrong, but they thought at the time there were evidence of microbial life in that meteor. And this was big splash in the news. This was in the early 90s. And, no less a figure than Reverend Jerry Falwell, who you may remember, said, well, if it's true that there's life on Mars, that would prove Christianity to be false. And he said, therefore, there is no life on Mars. Because his interpretation of the Bible is that the earth is the center of the universe, and the only life exists here. Doesn't really say that in the Bible, but that was his interpretation. So, now we're sophisticated enough today, at least most of us are, to hear a statement like that and say, well, that's patently absurd. If you're going to go against something that's proven fact, although as it turns out, it was incorrect. So Christianity is safe. But if you're going to make a statement, well, I don't care what the facts are, this is what my belief is, therefore the facts are wrong. As people, and you have a population becoming more rational, scientific in its development. No wonder people are leaving church. It's hard to make the two fit together. Not impossible, but it's increasingly difficult. So that's where we are right now. And yet there are other levels showing up. The cultural creatives is one that you might have heard of. That is another level of cultural development that is more about connection and oneness and that feelings are important. In fact, there's all kinds of interesting findings that come out of that, and that tends to be a lot of the folks that are attracted to our teaching tend to be in that group called the cultural creatives, which represents about 30% of the population of North America right now. They have the rational scientific understanding, but they also recognize, I think you might say, that there's more to life than meets the eye. So there's that sophistication of the understanding of the rational scientific with a willingness to recognize maybe deeper dimensions and more spirituality in the world. So I think where we find ourselves as a movement, as an organization within the Centers for Spiritual Living, as part of the New Thought family that includes Unity and others, is the world is moving toward a more spiritual place. Maybe hard to tell sometimes, but it's pretty clear that it is. Where are we going to fit in? How are we going to help that process along? How are we going to serve the people that seek that kind of a spiritual basis who may not be interested in the form that we currently use? Who may want to access the information in another way? Who may, I mean, think about it. If you have a computer, you can find a lot of stuff that's very much like what we teach. You know, you could sit home in your underwear on Sunday morning. I don't encourage that, but, you know, you could. And some of you have. You know, why doesn't everybody? And the other question comes, why didn't everybody do that? Why does anybody come here? I mean, you could, you know, because you could watch Wayne Dyer or Deepak Chopra or many of our ministers speak anytime you want. I think the answer is we also want community. You know, we also want to connect with people that are like-minded. We want to be in the place. You know, as nice as that video of Lisa and Erica was, wouldn't it be nicer to have them here? You know, it's a whole different experience. So we have that, what they call it high touch, high tech, where you have the combination of the technology and the connection. And I think that's where that's why we have these screens here and things, so we can incorporate the technology, but at the same time, we're here together. And as we move forward, you know, I think what we're going to have, my sense is, we're going to have some younger people come through, not all younger, but many of them will be younger, that come into ministry that are going to be in tune with how to reach their generation in ways that are different from what we currently do. And that's already emerging, and Kenn, you know, can probably speak to that to some extent. We already see some of the young adults coalescing into leadership groups and things like that. And, you know, they're very clear. I'm mentoring a young adult now. He's very clear. He says, I don't want to go to church on Sunday. Doesn't interest me. But I love the teaching. And the kid I'm mentoring, he's 29, he's a facility manager for one of our centers. He said, Sunday's my day off. You know, so it's just kind of interesting where you have these different approaches and everything. And, you know, we do tend to get set in our ways, don't we? And the next generation comes along and they want to do it differently. And in the past, there was enough structure and the cultural development was such that we continued to enforce on generation after generation how it was going to be. Now people kind of expect to make their own choices. You know, if this generation, the baby boomers and the millennials and now the newer generation, if they'd been born in the Middle Ages, this would have happened then. But that wasn't what was going on. The development wasn't there. So we're going through a transitional time, and my sense is this teaching is going to be around in a bigger and bigger way, and I don't think we know what it's going to look like. We're going to keep doing what we're doing, and then adding to it, and some things are going to really take off and be successful, and other things are going to kind of get left by the wayside because they don't work. So so I find, you know, myself in a position of being in the mystery and being in the not knowing, but recognizing that we have to be really attentive to the winds of change as they show up in the world. We have to really listen to people with different viewpoints about how it can be. And especially those in our movement that are willing to step up and invest in some way, whether it's, you know, with themselves or their time or their talent, or they want to become a minister, but they want to do a different way, is to try to encourage that. Because I don't think we know what the next model is. But I bet it's out there in some kind of a larval form right now. And then in 10 years, we'll all be saying, oh, yeah, that's just the way we always do it, you know. So I'm going to close right at that point. I'm going to invite Dr. Kenn up, and thank you. And Dr. Kenn, if you don't know, I know we have some folks here that he's the spiritual leader of the Centers for Spiritual Living, which we serve somewhere around 250,000 people around the world. In how many countries are we now? Like 22 countries. I knew you'd know that. And he's also the co-pastor up at the Center for Spiritual Living Kelowna with his wife, Dr. Deborah Gordon. And I'm honored to say he's also one of my best friends. So welcome aboard.
Thank you, Jim. I just got off a plane from Denver. As a matter of fact, I just came in from the Golden, where our head office is. And we were doing a budget retreat, which is just joyful. So here you watch me shift from left brain to right brain. Magnificently, I trust. When Jim texted me, because we're modern and technologically savvy, and so he texted me and said, so when you come, I hope you'll be able to drop by Wednesday night and speak on Wednesday night with me. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. I'd never turn up an opportunity to be able to share. And he said the title was going to be The Future of Our Movement. And he said, I'll give you an easy title, something you should easily be able to talk to. God, I wish it were that easy. The truth of the matter is that the future of our movement is we're going to create a world that works for everyone. It might not happen in my lifetime, I don't know. I'm not going to bet on it. It's possible, it's a potential. But the important thing is that that's the way the evolution that Dr. Jim was talking about is going. That's what's going to happen, is we eventually will come as a civilization and a society and as a world to a place that we actually have enough consciousness to be able to realize that we can create a world that works for everyone and that we can maintain it and sustain that. And when we talk about the title of The Future of Our Movement, I want to stress the fact that we're not talking about the future of Centers for Spiritual Living. We're talking about the future of our movement, and they're two different things. They're two very, very different things. And we have to remember that. Dr. Jim, I heard him allude to a couple of different organizations, such as Unity and Divine Science, and there's several that are New Thought organizations that have structure, and then there's an incredible amount of them that have no structure whatsoever, but they're also moving in the area of creating a world that works for everyone, and they're part of the New Thought movement. And it's important for us to remember that, because what we do in Centers for Spiritual Living is we create the spiritual community that allows people to come together with our hearts to be able to recognize that this is a possible potential, and to keep it ever present and ever focused in our consciousness so that we don't give up on it. That's what we're doing. That's what we're about. That's what the organization and the structure is about. But the movement itself is a grassroots movement of awakening. It's the awakening of the world itself to a realization that the limited thinking that we've had up until this time doesn't have to exist. And so as part of it, I think that it is impactful for us to realize that our job is to share that. Our job is to let the world know that. Not let the world necessarily know that there's a great center in Simi Valley, although there is, and you're very fortunate to have it. But to let the world know that it's possible for us to live in harmony with each other, with compassion with each other, in a way where there's enough for everyone, and we can share it throughout the world, and we still don't have to do without. So really what the teaching and the movement is about is the abolition of fear. Because the only thing that keeps us from getting what it is that we want is that fearful notion that if we let somebody else have more, that we ourselves won't have enough. Or more to the point, that we won't have what we want to have. I mean, when you actually think about it, John Lennon saying, you know, can you imagine a world with no possessions? And just speaking for myself, just saying, I don't want to live in a world with no possessions. I like the idea of possessions. And I'll bet you so do you. And so, you know, it isn't an either-or situation. It's possible for us to do this without having to lose something in the process of doing it. But in order to get there, what is required of us is to expand our consciousness, to awaken to a different idea. And I heard Dr. Jim talking about the evolution of the teaching, and Dr. Holmes moving forward, ever open at the top, ever understanding that there's new things to know, there's new things to understand. And if you just do the history of Holmes himself, you'll see that he really made a transition from his concepts and his beliefs from the mental to the heart, from the west to the east. And he really grew and developed that idea and that thought. And I'm told in his later years that he really concentrated on the fact that there was other things besides just the idea of what we think about comes about, or how to change the individual life, how to change our life and make our life better. And we brought in this statement that went out into the world, and the statement basically looks like this. It's change your mind and change your life. And the movement itself isn't even interested in that anymore. The new generation isn't interested in change your mind and change your life. It's interested in change your mind and change the world. And where we are in the organizational structure, and to a large degree in the movement, where we are right now is still holding on to the idea that this is an individualistic self-help organization structure. And that is so wrong. It misses the point at so many different levels. And we inherited it naturally from our predecessors who gave it to us because they thought that they could build a better world by making us better people, by allowing us to have a better experience of freedom, the first law of the universe, and by providing us with that opportunity. And I think that we achieved that, and then we flattened out all the way across the movement. And I'm talking about millions of people in the movement right now. We flattened out with that idea that somehow or other this teaching was about how I can make things happen in my life to make my life better and the lives of the people that are around me, the people who I'm intimate with, who I'm connected to, who I really love, who I honor, who I want to be in connection with. And instead what's happening right now in this new generation, and it is a divine impulse that's moving us forward to the realization that we don't have to put up with the things that we see in the world that are happening that perhaps we feel are less than skillful. And instead what we can do is we can actually take this teaching out into the world, and we can share it to such a degree that people will begin to implant it into the structure of how the world itself is run right now. Which basically means that it needs to move from this room into your municipal hall. And it needs to move from your municipal hall, it needs to move into your state legislature. And it needs to move from your state legislature into your Congress and your Senate. And it needs to move to the highest offices of this land, and at the same time it needs to move in the same way, in the same focus, in the same fashion in all of the different nations of the world. And actually we've been given a huge gift. It's a divine gift, and it's called information, and it comes through the internet. And when you saw the Arab Spring, what you saw was you saw the awakening of people to the realization of a potential of freedom. But the truth is that most of us don't know how to apply it. We don't know how to put it into the world so that it's effective in our lives. So we see it outside, and we still have what? That sense that there is somebody with something and somebody without something. And therefore what we do is we move to a place still, because our consciousness still exists there, of defensiveness to maintain and hang on to what we have. And I'm sure you're witnessing that in the pendulum swing. I certainly see it in Canada, and I watch enough American news to realize that fear is a motivator that's being utilized and used all over the place, and it's a false motivator because it leaves behind a residue. It leaves behind a residue of feeling that there isn't enough. There's an underlining statement that's being made when we operate from fear. It's like what Dr. Jim was talking about when he was talking about the Christian pundit who said, yes, well, it couldn't possibly be that there was other lives on Mars because that would make Christianity wrong, therefore there's no other lives on Mars. So let's extrapolate out that idea within our own minds and our own thinking and our own way of being, and realize that every time that we think that we have to have violence, every time we think that we have to live out of principles that we know, that we've learned in this teaching, Every time we do that, what we're basically doing is we're falling back to that consciousness that is protective, that says, the way that I'm thinking right now has to be right, or else I'm wrong and life has no meaning. So when we talk about the future of the movement, what we're talking about is an unlimited potential. We're talking about something that is beyond the consciousness, probably, certainly of myself, and beyond the consciousness, I would suggest, of the majority of the people that live in the world today. Because it rises above the idea of having to defend ourselves for everything, instead to an idea that there's plenty to go around. The basic teaching is that there is an abundance in the world, and that abundance is ours if we're willing to step into it and embrace it and accept it. And we have to move beyond the concept of the individual consciousness to the concept of the collective consciousness. We have to take this out into the world in a bigger, more fashionable way. Now, I will tell you what I see and what I visualize and what I think, and I hope this is okay. We're going to just have an informal chat, just the 60 of us here. And, you know, are you familiar with the term zeitgeist? What zeitgeist is it's a German word that means basically or essentially the coming together of like minds. And there's been other zeitgeists in the past. We certainly aren't the first zeitgeist that ever happened. I would imagine, and everything I've read demonstrates that in the 13th century, at the end of the Dark Ages, there was a zeitgeist. And that zeitgeist actually propelled and initiated the end of the Dark Ages, that idea and that concept where everything that's ever necessary to know is already known, therefore we're not going to know anything else. Are you familiar with the Dark Ages? So the next zeitgeist that I know of, that I recognize, and I'm sure there was many, many in between, was the Transcendentalists. And the Transcendentalists came together with a very, very similar belief system to what we have. And that was back in the 1840s, 1850s, and 1860s. And what happened was there was an attraction and a drawing together of like consciousness that came together. And it got reflected in some very, very popular people in the world. At that time, I can think of Emerson and Thoreau, for example. My observation of the world, and I most certainly don't ever want to sound egotistical, is that zeitgeist is happening right now, and of a similar ilk. And the difference between that zeitgeist and this zeitgeist is that this zeitgeist isn't egocentric to the degree where fame becomes the necessity. And I'm not saying that one was, but I'm saying that was the result of it. What it was a drawing together of people in a shared leadership model to be able to transform and transcend what the existing consciousness of the world was at that time. And I believe that what's happened to us now is that by some cosmic, divine, synchronistic activity, is that the zeitgeist is happening. Now, why that's important for me to share this with you is because you're part of that zeitgeist. And you might choose to say that you're not. You might choose to say that you're here because your best friend brought you here, or your most important significant other brought you here, or your child brought you here. But the truth is that you're here because you're part of that consciousness that needs to expand out into the world. And the responsibility of the change and the future of our movement rests in your hands as much as it rests in anyone's hands. But we have this tendency in our centers and in our communities and in our movement to believe that it's supposed to be done by somebody outside of themselves. You know, I was elected the spiritual leader of this movement, God only knows how, but it occurred at any rate, and the manifestation and the demonstration is in place. So that's great. But my job is not to lead you. My job is to follow us. Follow me, I'll be right behind you. It's not to in any way, shape, or form enter into a place where I think that my job is to change the world. My job is to awaken everyone to the realization that the responsibility of changing the world rests with you. And so here's the future of our movement. The future of our movement is as large as you think it can be, and it can't be any larger. And if you think that it's limited by the amount of time that you have in the day, by the amount of resources that you can put towards it, by the amount of your life that you're willing to spend doing it, by the amount of time that you're willing to stay in practice, by the amount of self-responsibility you're willing to take with regard to it, then that's exactly what it'll be. And it won't be anything more. It's not up to Dr. Jim and myself and Dr. Elizabeth and other people who are present here as the presumed leadership of churches and centers in the organization to change the world. Our job is to empower you to transform the world, to create a world that works for everyone. So when I talk about that, I bring up some certain points and certain positions in certain places. I heard Dr. Jim talk about the young adults who perhaps don't necessarily want to be present in the existing structure that we call centers right now. Now, I believe that that's true. I see it in activity. I've seen it in action. I've heard it from people who speak that way. And that's okay. At 28, I didn't want to go to church either. And probably neither did you, with some exceptions. The key to this is that what we need to do is we need to awaken ourselves to know that the activities that we do are bigger than what we actually think they are. Am I making sense? And the activities that we do is how we live our lives and how we present ourselves into the world. We cannot ever expect that the world is going to be any different than we are, because the world is a reflection of who we are. So unless we're prepared to make those changes, and unless we're prepared to live in that discipline, unless we're prepared to make those sacrifices that we view today as sacrifices that tomorrow we'll view as seva, or selfless giving, as long as we do that, what's going to happen is the world's going to maintain and stay the same way that it is. And the zeitgeist is going to find that it weakens as it runs against the powers that change and transform it. The Transcendentalists basically got crushed by the Civil War. When the fear came up around the Civil War, the war became a greater focus and intention than the transformation of society, which was being told at that particular time by those people. If you know anything about history, that's basically what occurred with it. And then it dwindled and died back down again. And it's died many times in the past. And our job as a community is to ensure that it doesn't die again for another time. It's to ensure that we stand up against fear, and that we stand up against fear being the motivator, which allows us to fall back to the understanding that we need to have violence because it's the only thing that'll work. Or we need to have power because it's the only thing that'll work. Or we need to have withholding because it works. Or we need to have hatred and bigotry and prejudice and separation because it works. And the truth is, it doesn't work. It never has, and it never will. Otherwise, the proof of the pudding would be we'd be living right now in a world that works for everyone. So you can pretty well bet that what we've done for the last 150,000 to 500,000 years has been a precursor to where we're going with our consciousness as far as the evolution of what's happening in the world. You can pretty well bet that the world is a reflection right now, as enlightened and wonderful as we are, and I can't speak for everybody here because I'm sure that there might be an avatar out there that I don't know about. I've never seen auras very well, so I can't see you levitating and empowering. But I will tell you that for the majority of us in North America, and the majority of us that I know and that I recognize and that I observe, what happens is we don't live in the principles that we espouse. We really don't. We have special little reasons why we don't. And every one of those little reasons is a magnificent reason. he is dumb. He really doesn't know what's going on. She really wrecked you. It's really their fault. And I really need to work harder to have what I need to have in life in order to feel good. And I need to do whatever I need to do to get that. And I can't afford to risk my livelihood because somebody else like China might want something. So we build all these structures in there, and it's not that they're unconscious, they're just habit. And they float in with the way that we live our lives. They just drift in. Maybe you've noticed that. Maybe you've run across somebody who you thought was exceptionally spiritual and especially connected to principles who showed up in your life with a problem and you couldn't believe that they had a problem. Anybody ever seen that? Like, who are they to be spiritual, right? And not even realizing at the same time that the spirituality you're recognizing is really a reflection of something that exists within you at some point and some level. And I'm not just going back to the teaching of saying you're responsible to the whole world. I'm going back to the teaching of saying that we as a community need to begin to operate from the faith and from the principles and the tenets that we espouse. And it's not an organizational tenet. These are the tenets that were taken from all the major religions and traditions in the first place. Dr. Holmes didn't invent anything. As much as I love and honor him for what he did was he brought forth what was already existing. He never went out and invented spirituality. He never went out and invented the laws that he talks about. What he did was he recognized them in existence in the existing traditional religions and theosophy of the world around him in the first place. And he recognized the truth that lined between them and how it seemed to work. And he brought the commonality out into it so that he shared it to the world as something that wasn't, I'm right, you're wrong. It was, we're right, let's focus on what works and let's stop focusing on what doesn't work. Am I still making sense? And we need to do that in our lives. We need to be so grounded in the bigger vision and so grounded in the concept of what is potential and possible for our movement that we will not be swayed by the media machine that moves through. We will not be swayed by somebody who tells us something that's scary. We will not be swayed by the form that exists in our life that looks like it endangers us in some way. We need to actually devote ourselves to the world around us to such a degree that we live out of the passion of Holmes and therefore live out of the passion of the truth that's been taught for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Recently, I had an opportunity to meet with an organization called the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, which is a Pentecostal ministry. And it was fascinating to go there because if you know it or not, there are segments and sections of New Thought that if you walked into one of their centers, you wouldn't believe that you were in a New Thought church. You are so accustomed to the way that we teach, and I'm speaking for those of you who are regular attendees in religious science, so accustomed to the way that we teach that it seems normal for us to be there. But if you were to go out to the Universal Foundation for Better Living, which was founded by Dr. Johnny Coleman, you'll see a totally different story. I'd be giving a totally different talk, I promise you. I'd be evangelizing right here and right now. I'd be letting you know what the truth is. And I'd be expecting some feedback from you guys as I spoke. That's right. And they're not wrong. They teach the same thing. And what they are is they're an offshoot of something else and an offshoot of something else. So I went to see the Pentecosts, and we went and we talked with them. And we were invited there. David Alexander and I were invited there. And David gave the history of the relationship that we had with them, which basically was the parts and pieces that found its way into New Thought that came from the Pentecostal movement. And there were many of them that found their way into our teaching. And so he shared that in a very, very great way and developed and built a foundation for me to present the vision. And the vision was really simple. You've heard me do it. Some of you have heard me do it many times. Maybe some others haven't. But the foundation is that we all want the same thing. The world. I don't care whether you're in Egypt, whether you're in Syria, whether you're in Africa, or whether you're in Canada or the United States. It doesn't matter. We all want the same thing. We want safety. We want security. We want to have a roof over our head. We want our children to be safe and cared for and to have food. We want to have drinkable water. We want to have medical care. We want to have any number of things that you can bring into the mix that we all want to have. We want to share in the technology of the movement of the world itself. And we want freedom. And if you were to go anywhere in the world and ask people what they want, wouldn't they tell you that that's what they want? Could you think of some area where they would be in disagreement with you? And as the master teacher Jesus said, the poor in spirit will always be with us. So there's always people who might have a tendency to say that they don't want that, but they're not even a percentage as to the 7 billion of us who sit on this planet and on this plane. So here we are, 7 billion of us wanting the same thing. So let me ask you a question, because this pertains to the future of our movement. Why don't we have it if we all want it? Is it because there isn't enough? Do you believe that? Because I can prove you wrong if you do. There's more than enough food. There's more than enough water. Technology can provide us with anything that we want at this particular time. There is nothing missing. People will say, well, there isn't enough money, but we bailed out Wall Street and there was enough money. They spent $3 trillion on that, a couple trillion on a couple of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. That was enough money to feed the world. So that's not the problem. So the problem is not that there's lack in the world. And the problem isn't that there isn't enough money to be able to share and make these things work in the world. So what's the problem? 7 billion of us want the same thing. What's the problem? The problem is us. The problem is we haven't arrived at the consciousness to be able to accept and understand the truth that lays before us. It sits right there in front of us. It just is awaiting for us, just like Dr. Holmes said, to awaken to it, to bring it in and accept it. A world that works for everyone is possible tomorrow morning. Well, time frame, I've got some limitations on that. But it would be available to us right now. In the present moment, everything we want is available to everyone in the world right now. Not only everyone in the world, but I'll add for those of you people who are thinking that I'm only dealing with humans, and still maintain a quality life and a quality planet. It's all there. Do you believe me? Yes. So why don't we have it if we all want it? We don't have the intention. We don't live the truth. We give it away all the time, right? And I'm not talking about you as individuals. I'm talking about our society as a whole, as the collective consciousness of who we are. We give it away all the time. What happens is that the alternative comes up where we have a decision to make. It enters into our life and it's in front of us, and we see it as a society, as a collective consciousness. 7 billion of us witness it happen in the world. And there is a decision to be made. And what happens is that we decide the wrong way and we fall back into the fear. And we fall back into the lack. And we fall back, which really means that we don't really believe what we know to be true. To desert the truth in time of need is not to know the truth. Dr. Ernest Holmes. And that's what we do, is we surrender ourselves to it. And we give up on it. How many people are watching the elections right now? Oh, I'm the only one? Okay, right. So it doesn't matter which way it goes. I'm not here an advocate for either side, because to be quite honest, if you're going to talk about individuality and freedom, then I really am a right wing. If you're going to talk about compassion and understanding, then I really am left wing. So I don't know where I sit with the way that they've defined and labeled what's going on in the world. I just know that I don't have any pocket to fit into right now for my particular way of being. Do you agree? You know, I'm a Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, libertarian, socialist, Marxist, capitalist. I mean, you know, I have no idea where I fit into the whole quadrant of everything. And by the way, my degree is in political science and philosophy. But the thing is that, so I can't fit into anything that I see that's happening around me. It doesn't make any sense to me. It has no logical way that it moves. And the reason it doesn't have a logical way that it moves is because it's not about moving. It's about staying still. It's about giving way to an old way of thinking. And it's about maintaining a status quo and keeping something alive that, quite frankly, should have been dead and buried a long time ago. And it is reflective of the consciousness of the society that we're part of. And we think in our communities that we might be above it. And you know what? On Sunday morning, when I'm standing up here on this stage, I am. I'll tell you, I'm a living avatar when I'm up here. But it's when I go home and deal with my issues at home that somehow or other I become a Tarvavat instead of an avatar. I kind of go backwards on the whole thing. And I just kind of slip back. And I watch myself, and I think I'm a very awake human being. So, you know, I keep a close look on it. But I still fumble all the time. And I'm taking it on myself. I'm bearing the cost of society for me, because we don't need to do that if you're doing it at your place, in your home. If you're sacrificing and giving up the truth to know that there's an abundance in the world that's all around us, and you're giving that up because it's impugning on your fear and your life, then I will guarantee you what you're doing is you're supporting what's happening in the overall consciousness of the collective. Am I making sense? So, when I say that the future of the movement is in our hands, what I'm saying is that we need to start applying ourselves to this in everything we do in our lives. And we need to start standing up to it and denying the falsity when it shows up in our life. Not to proselytize, not to say, well, in our religion, we don't believe that. God only knows we tried that, and that's just another way of trying to make yourself right. If there's proof of life on other planets, then that's not possible because it would make Christianity wrong. Well, it's the same theory in our own lives if we don't live to it. And so what we need to do is we need to really step into the concept. We need to step into the principles. We need to start really creating those as the foundation of our being in our lives. Not so that we can grow the organization, not even so that we can grow the movement, but so that we can awaken humanity and we can create a world that works for everyone. And when we're prepared to give away the little things that we have in our lives that are fearful to give away, what we'll find is that the results actually prove it. But somebody has to take the step to do it. Somebody has to be the responsible party to actually take the activity to do it. And our tendency in our consciousness of our collective and the way that we were trained is to believe that somebody else is doing it. Somebody else is doing it for us. It's somebody else's responsibility. Somebody else did it right. Somebody else is doing it wrong. Somebody else is broken. But it's never us. How about that George Bush, huh? See? So I don't care which way you think, somebody else. How about that Barack Obama? Somebody else. How about that Ken Gordon? Somebody else. How about that Jim Lockard? Somebody else. What we do is we have a tendency to throw our power away in the most delightful ways. And sometimes it's really gratifying for us and for others. I love it when people adore me. I love being idolized. But that's not what's going to change the movement. That's not what's going to change the world. What's going to change the world is when we band together and develop a collective consciousness that's larger than the collective consciousness that's leading us in the other way. Have you ever seen the toy, the gizmo of the big balloon that they blow up and people can climb into it? Am I the only one who's ever seen this? And you know, they climb. We used to have them on our lake. Yeah, they blow up this big balloon. It really wasn't a balloon, but it was a ball full of air. And you could climb inside it, then they blow it up. So you'd be inside it, and then what you could do is you could walk across the lake on the ball. You know, as you walked, the ball floated on the water, and you kind of propelled yourself across the lake. And if you walked this way, the balloon would go this way. And if you walked this way, the balloon would go this way. Right? Get the picture? Here's the way I view what's happening in the world today. There's 7 billion of us inside of a balloon. The big balloon. There is a small number of people in comparison to the 7 billion who are moving in this direction. And this group of people that's sitting in the center, which probably constitutes over 6 billion people, feel the leaning to go this way. So they go the easy route. They go the way the pressure is taking them, and they begin to follow the ones that are walking this way. Am I making sense? Am I creating a picture for you? On the other side, what you have is you have a half dozen, 5,000, 250,000 of us that are scrambling and running against the wall over here, trying to work against the momentum that's moving in this direction. What we need to do to really empower the movement is we need to develop the numbers so that there's more people moving in this direction than there is in that direction that are leading the way. So let's just do some figures here just off the top of my head. These are not legitimate, logical, scientific figures because I wouldn't know that if I fell over it. You have 10 million people moving towards fear. You have 10 million people moving towards the way it was always done. You have 10 million people that are adverse to change. You have 10 million people that want to maintain the status quo. You have 6,695 billion or 1,000, I don't know what the number is, you know what I'm saying, that are standing in the middle, that are feeling the weight there and going the easy route to follow it, right? Over here, you have 250,000 people, 500,000 people, trying to change the momentum. And until we achieve the momentum that the 10 million are moving in this direction, we will not have success. But the minute that we have 10 million and one, that's not a real figure, I made it up, remember that. The minute that we have that number, what will occur is the 6 billion plus in the middle will have an easier way to go and they'll start going in this direction. So you want to know what your responsibility is? Your responsibility is not to give up going in that way. And that way is the way to light. It's the way to compassion. It's the way to understanding. It's the way to sharing. It's the way to love. It's the way to openness. It's the way to peace. And that's where we're at as far as the movement goes. And so we throw it upon a few to say, I'm sure glad that those are running against that wall. And I'm telling you that we'll run against that wall until we die. And then we'll come back in another form and run against it again. But without you running with us, we're not going to get anywhere. It's not going to happen. Because that 10 million is going to continue to grow and move in the direction that they have chosen to go. And the mass in the middle is going to follow the easiest route. Now, does that mean that we have to work hard to do it? I am against the word hard. It means for me that my life is to do it. I know that's the truth for Jim. I know it's the truth for Elizabeth. I know it's the truth for a lot of us. I give my life to do that. There's nothing worth anything better than that. You can take away everything I own. There's nothing that I could do better than to transform the world to make it a world that works for everyone. There is no thing that exists in my life that has more importance than to awaken myself and humanity to its magnificence. This is what's happening in our movement right now. What's happening is there is a large group of us that are awakening to this idea, this ideal, this thought, and we're putting it into an intention and making it happen. What I want most of all, and what I want you to do, and who I want you to be, are the people that are moving in the direction away from the things that you don't want and towards the things you know that are possible. How many people think we can create a world that works for everyone with what we have on this plane right now? Which direction are you moving? Are you moving there most of the time, some of the time, or all of the time? Because to the degree that you're willing to join in that movement is to the degree that we're going to transform the world. So the future of our movement is in our hands. It's up to us. So I bless you. And I really look forward to answering questions here.
Okay, you know, it's interesting. I did have a quote I was going to put up on the screen I thought was relevant. Let's see if it still is. This is from Dr. Holmes, and as always, he's kind of wordy. He says, "We wish to discover what to believe in, why we believe in it, and why such a belief is reasonable. And insofar as possible, to enter into the nature of the invisible cause of this manifest life of ours. We wish to discover how this cause works, its relationship to us and our relationship to it, and how we may use this knowledge. The world is tired of mysteries, does not understand symbols, and longs for reality. What is reality? Where may it be found? And how used? These are some of the questions one should like to have answered." And I think it's the working out of that that gets you going in that direction. I mean, you know, when you see the possibility a little bit at a time of how it can be. You know, when we were up at Asilomar a couple of weeks ago, I mean, many of you have been there, and you know, it's just a place. But you know that during that time we're there, when you walk down the path, you're in a different world than you are when you walk down the average street at home or go to the mall or whatever. You're in a place of receptivity where people intentionally, purposely, and out loud love. And that just shifts the whole experience so incredibly. So I think that's what we bring to the world, is the capacity to recognize that that can be something we do all the time. So we are recording this. We're going to put the recording up on the website for anybody who wants to listen. So if you have a question or a comment, we would ask you to come up to one of the mics here so you can be heard. Does anybody have a question? Well, just come on up. You don't have to raise your hand. Just come on up. You can get a couple people in line if you want to, you know, so in the interest of time. And just say your name and what your question is.
My name is John Sheely, and I'd like to know what my responsibility, my individualization of the one, what is my responsibility?
When the Dalai Lama was asked what one thing he could suggest that we do to change the world and transform the world, the Dalai Lama said, love one another. You start from there, I guess. I don't know about you, but there are people in the world that sometimes I think I don't love that much. Once again, am I the only one? Oh, I'm so ashamed. I told you, I had no idea how I got this job. So, you know, when I do that, when I see that, when I feel that, when I recognize that, I I take personal responsibility and I look at my own self. So, and I say, why do I feel that way? If this is what I believe, why do I feel that way? And inevitably what happens, no matter what period of time it takes, because it's not about time. Whatever period of time it takes, I come to the awakening and the arising in my own consciousness to understand where the grounds are for it. I would suggest that we do that for all these questions. When we watch television and we find ourselves in fear about something, that what we do is we ask ourselves those questions. In 1991, I joined the peace movement, just at the outbreak of the first Gulf War. So I was an avid peacenik for about 2 months. And when the war started, and I was a practitioner at the time, and when the war started, what happened for me was I was watching TV, and I started off saying, this is stupid. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't go to war. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. And so I was really shooting on all over the place. And slowly but surely, as I watched TV, what happened was I began to get sway to it. And eventually what I found was I was in total support of the first Gulf War. After the first Gulf War, I said, how did that happen? And so I just checked out my consciousness, and I realized that I'd once again bought into the traditional historical stuff that we had. Now, I didn't beat myself up. I'm using this as an example. As a matter of fact, I used it as an aha for me. And I said, well, next time I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to be more aware. And sure enough, the next time when it occurred, I was more aware. And I didn't go as far in support, but I still moved back and forth in the way that it was. And what I found for myself, and I can only share for myself, John, is it? I can only share for myself. What I realize is that it's all a process and it's all a work in progress. But as long as I'm willing to do it at whatever consciousness I have that I enter into it, it's forward moving in the direction that we want to go. And that's what I do. So I don't beat myself up. I don't say, oh, you're so stupid. I don't do any of that stuff. I just am aware of what I'm thinking, usually after I thought it. And then what I do is I work on it so that I can get back to my truth and go in that direction. Yeah, yeah. You should be up here. That's way better. Yeah, stay awake. That's what I meant to say.
I'm Dominic Cosentino, and what I found interesting, the way I try to live, and this is not ego or not, and I hope it doesn't come off like that, but I find the way that I change my thinking, my world, and the people around me, that I think the world becomes better, is when I'm like in, me and my wife a few weeks ago, was in CVS, and we were in there, we were buying something, and I got done paying for it, and this lady came in, and she got some hot dogs, and she left to get something and come back, and you could tell she was kind of razzled and just not at peace. And I said to my wife, I said, she's homeless. She goes, how do you know? I said, I don't know, I just know. So I go to the cashier, because she seemed like she knew what was happening. I said, is she homeless? And she goes, yes, she is. She goes, you knew that? I said, these hot dogs, let me pay for them real quick before she knows who did it. Just tell her God loves her. We got to get out of here. So I pay for them, we leave. My wife looks at me, she goes, she's almost in tears. She goes, that was wonderful. So well, it's neat that it comes so natural for me to do that. And I walk away and I say to myself, God, bless me for letting me know that and to remember. And then like a few weeks later, somewhere else, and some lady was coming behind me and go, oh, and I opened the door and she goes, thank you so much. And I'm walking right to my wife. I said, I did an act of kindness, because a few weeks ago, Dr. Jim had a whole thing about do kind things and remember to do them. And then this other lady, I was able to open the door, and then another door, and I said, wow, 2 acts of kindness in the same person. It's kind of neat. So my wife's catching, like, I get to take classes, and I have more time, so I'm blessed to have that. And I have more time to be here on Wednesday, and my wife works a lot, and she can't. But, I'm just so lucky that I remembered to remember. And we're walking in. I took my wife to breakfast. I had to go see the hand surgeon. And we were walking into Denny's. We were walking. My wife stopped. And she walks back, and she picks up a cup on the ground. And then she walks over with me, and she puts it in the garbage. I go, she goes, I know, an act of kindness. And I'm like, so I was almost in tears, because these things that I do, people see. And my wife is, and I said, why didn't you get it the first time? Because you weren't sure you really wanted to pick up a dirty cup? She goes, no, because I really didn't think it'd be a garbage. And once I saw the garbage, then I said, I'll go get the cup. But you know, when people see that, and if everybody did these little things, you know, like letting the person in line in the store, and I try to be conscious of that all the time. And you know what? I live such a happier life because I know that I'm changing the world by what I do. And I thank God for that, not me, that I'm just a channel that he uses. So that's just more of a comment rather than a thing. And thank you for sharing what you're sharing, because I think that's living what we're trying to do. And I'm an example of this teaching by doing that. And it's not that I want to impress anybody, it's just that I want to be that. And that's the beauty of the teaching, and I love that. And thank you for sharing, Doc.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic.
Yeah, model it.
My name is Mary, and wow, I just want to show or express my appreciation in the leap that this movement and our teaching seems to be taking from sort of an egocentric, I dare to say, into a more of a conscious evolution that's taking place on the planet. I think it's huge. I think it's a shift that's going to be recognized and appreciated and more effective than anything we've done in the past. I do.
Thank you, Mary. I agree, and I want you to know that I can't speak for Dr. Jim, but I can speak for me. I'm just along for the ride. You know, you're the ones who are pushing and getting it to happen. And so I'm just doing where your energy's going. And I mean, my energy's going there as well, but I'm only one running against the wall. So thank you. We're making progress.
So this is kind of a selfish question. Now, it seems to me that the New Thought movement has historically been kind of down on the New Age movement. But all this, you know, a world that works for everyone and zeitgeist, it sounds very New Agey to me. And I'm a New Ager from way back when. So, and I don't mean, you know, that crystals have power and that kind of thing, but the basic tenets of the New Age movement before it became a fad was a lot about what you're talking about. Is New Thought more like New Age than it used to be?
Want me to handle that one? You want to do
Sure.
that?
I was just going to say, is truth more like truth than it used to be? Go ahead.
Yeah. You know, I think that one of the things that's happening is commonality is showing up in a lot of different places. And, you know, the surface stuff is becoming less important. Again, looking at, I kind of enjoy looking at politics. It's sort of a, I don't know, it feels suicidal sometimes, but just kind of, you know, because it's just fascinating because it's such a reflection of kind of what's going on in the whole population and the process. And we've reached a point where we're so sclerotic, where everything is just kind of jammed up in terms of moving forward. At the same time that most of the great minds on the planet are saying this is the time we need to be moving forward in a lot of areas because things are getting serious. And there's some big issues that need attention. And yet we seem to have formed factions that consider it a success to keep something from happening. And I guess to me what's happening is that's in a sense the folks running against the other side of the ball, but they're running into each other. And I think it's going to be a combination of the folks that are moving toward what we would say love and compassion are not going to have to be quite as many because the folks running the other direction are starting to run across purposes. And things are beginning to deteriorate at that end. And that means it takes less energy to begin a shift. And it could be, you know, if this oneness thing is real, it could be that deep down inside there is a cooperative venture going on. And it's at the surface that we have to learn how to go in that direction. You know, there's an old saying, it's easier to ride a horse in the direction it's going. You may have to think about that one a minute, but But that doesn't mean that's where you want to go. And it is easier to go with the flow and go with the crowd in some ways, but it's not very fulfilling. So I really think that there is, there is underneath in the collective humanity and the collective creation something that wants to move forward, and that those of us that are surface consciousness, if we don't get in alignment with that, we'll be sloughed off. And the movement forward will happen. And it's messy and disorganized here at the surface right now, but I think we're in the process of seeing a shift of energy. I really do. And it probably isn't going to be a totally pleasant process, but I think it is happening. I know it's happening. And the value to me of this teaching in this kind of time is to be able to stay in clarity as that unfolds. And to say, yeah, that's happening. It's like, my favorite saying from Joseph Campbell, one of them is, if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And breaking eggs is a messy business, but that's sort of what we're into, I think. And the if we were all ready to turn around and say, yes, let's go toward love. We all want the same thing. We all want a world that works for everyone. But we clearly don't have that ability right now. And how we develop that, I think, is what's occurring from within at a deeper level. I think we're just going to do maybe one more question because I want to honor time. It's already a little after 8:30. So go ahead.
All right. I'll talk to you later about it if you want. We're working on diversity in a lot of things. Our movement is prejudiced was prejudiced towards a lot of stuff, very, very quietly and very politely. Mm-hmm. And my discovery, which I try to share with everyone, is that I can't afford to be prejudiced towards anything. We need everybody to work in the same direction. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to be having crystals at my center, because I've got a Science of Mind center. But what it does mean is I still honor and respect it, and I would honor and respect a crystal center if that's what they chose to have. And maybe even that isn't enough, but it's a step in the right direction for me. I'm a work in process.
Hi, Dr. Kenn. I'm Ann Snyder. I just wanted to let you know, this isn't really a question, but I wanted to let you know that whenever I've heard you speak, it's been a couple of times now, one of the things that happens with me is that there's sort of a bubbling up of the best part of me. You awaken that. And I was just going to make the comment that I know there's a movement going on. I mean, there's something happening worldwide. But I think, and I don't know if you would agree, I think the most that we can do, or the best that we can do, is to fight the small little battles of our own lives every day and stand up when we have the chance with the people around us, our neighbors, within our workplace, to have the courage to speak that small truth that we don't need to fear on a daily basis, because even among our own population, we're still fearful with each other. And if we can just remember to take each day at a time and to be the best person that we can be on a daily basis with each other and with ourselves, the rest will happen. You know, the change will happen as it's meant to happen. And I don't think we need to necessarily take it on, you know, as if it's our job to do that. It's a personal thing. And if we can do that well, and if we can encourage people around us to do that well, it'll happen. You know, it's a doing thing. It's not really, I admire and I'm so grateful that there are people like you that can articulate it well for the rest of us. But I think the battle, the fight is really on a daily basis, a very private one. And if we can just do that, we're going to be good.
I agree. You've woke something up inside me. As not too long ago, I received a letter from a third party, not from the first party, but saying something to the effect of, something that went along these lines, and it was from a minister, and it said, I was really trusting that with a new spiritual leader who could dedicate all their times to being spiritual leader, that what we would have is a deepening of our spirituality. And my discovery after watching Dr. Kenn at Asilomar was that basically I didn't feel there was a deepening in spirituality. And
you're such a disappointment.
I know. And so, like I'm a human being. It's a personal thing.
Yeah.
I just happened to take my clothes off and share it to you. But so I looked at it and I thought about it and I ruminated on it and I worried about it. And then I came to my own conclusion, my personal conclusion. And it's what I do when I speak with anybody. It's what I do the best of my ability when I'm not in my own practice. And I trust I do it in my own practice, but it's a different place. But I show up as authentic as I can be. And there's lots of stuff inside me that says I should be different to do what I'm doing. And when I first became a minister, there was lots of stuff inside of me that said, oh my God, they're calling me reverend. I should be way more spiritual than I am right now. And for a while I might play that and I might do that, and then it doesn't work for me. The cosmos, the divinity, the higher power, the thing itself, that which is you, everything in this universe was made for a purpose. We know that. We can go outside and a fly will fly by, and intellectually we can say, oh, if it weren't for that fly, there wouldn't be the bird. If it weren't for the bird, there wouldn't be, et cetera, et cetera. We know intellectually that it's all there. We were raised in a society that believed that humanity was given dominion over all things in the world. And the pendulum swung on that. And so the tendency sometimes I hear from our society is that everything has value in the world except humanity or except me. And the truth is that we were all brought together to help create the balance of life. And that sitting in this room is the perfect mosaic. And if we were all honest and authentic and actualized, what would occur for us is that we would move in harmony. That would be the 60 people in this room, and it would be the 7 billion of us on this planet, because the divinity didn't make anything without a purpose. And that purpose that was created, we are a part of that mosaic and part of fitting in there. And perhaps our first step is to practice spirituality from the point of view that the real spirituality is to be authentic and be real, and not to pretend. And so I respond to the beautiful things you said when you opened, and the answer to that is, when I show up, I sometimes struggle, but I always show up real to the very best of my ability. And I don't try to be somebody else, much to my own dismay sometimes. And I would recommend that everyone try it, because it's worked real well for me.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, let's have a round of applause for Dr. Kenn. Huh? Okay, a couple quick announcements. On Friday night, the Healthy Food Group's going to show the movie Food Incorporated, which will scare the hell out of you about your food. Then 2 weeks from Friday, we have the spaghetti dinner, the gas card drawing all going on, and amazing entertainment at the junkyard. There's flyers out there. Please tell your friends about this. This is going to be, a thing for anybody that likes to eat and likes music and fun. So you don't have to be a member of the center to go. All right? And we have the expo coming up, and we got some tables available for that, for those who would like to do that. So and I do want to, honor the presence of Dr. Elizabeth Marshall, who is here. And also Mr. Jeff Sinden on the CS Center for Spiritual Living Leadership Council. Oh, and there's Dr. Susan Holton here, too. Let's give her a round of applause. I'm sorry? And we know Reverend Patrick, of course. He already got up and was introduced. Reverend Patrick, a round of applause. Because that's why we do this. We do it for the applause. Okay. Dr. Elizabeth, would you give us a closing treatment? And as she's coming up, I invite you to set for yourself an intention based on something you may have heard today or tonight that you would like to activate or actualize in your life.
Just take a deep breath for a moment. What a joy. What an honor. And there is no doubt that there has been an elevation of consciousness. I kept thinking there's no birth that is clean. They're all messy. But something wonderful comes out of it. And we are there. And each of us in our own way have been elevated and add to the global consciousness. And we move forward from this point, impacting the love, the peace, the joy, the awareness that we are one. One. And we move in that awareness. And so when we honor another, we're honoring ourselves. And that spreads. And as we honor ourselves, we're honoring every other human being. I give thanks for this. And I know from this point on, it only grows and expands as you join with me in saying, and so it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming this evening, a special edition of Wednesday Night Alive, and we'll be back next week. And thanks to Scott in the booth for the sound.